What do Disney movies and clinical trials have in common? Well, just as storyboarding is used to design the sequences of a scene in your favorite Disney movie, it can also be used as a tool to improve team alignment and tell a clearer story to inspectors. From startup to closeout, clinical trials never seem to go according to plan. But with storyboarding, you'll have a tool in your arsenal that will help explain those events and keep your story consistent. Today on the Seat of TMF, we're going to walk you through the ins and outs of storyboarding and how you can use them to help ease training, navigate mergers and acquisitions, and prepare for TMF inspections. The Seat of TMF is officially in session. Let's get into it.
Super excited for another session of State of TMF. I say that every time, but it is such a great thing that I look forward to every 2 weeks. I get to catch up with awesome people internally at Montrim, and I get to welcome Donatella back after a brief break. Donatella, welcome back to the show. How was your time away? What did you get up to in your absence?
Oh, thank you so much, Oliver. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be back today, especially with this very interesting topic that I really care about, storyboarding. So yes, I went on holiday, not on the beach anymore, unfortunately. But yes, I went in the south of Tuscany. I don't know if you know the region in Italy. Very nice, not just for the seaside, but also for the food, the wine. Not very relaxing because with 2 babies, I don't think that they were relaxing holidays. But lots of fun, again, lots of nice food, nice places, and the seaside. It's always a pleasure to be on the beach and see the seaside. So it was a great time.
I guess when the kids go to bed, that's when the wine tasting begins.
Yes, exactly. Definitely. So absolutely a great time. But I'm very happy to be back with you today. But I know that even you in July has some special event.
That's true. You missed that while you were sipping wine in Tuscany. Yeah, I think for those that were here last session, they would have found out that I got married in the beginning of the month. So that was kind of my my little fun time off. I had some friends and family come in into the city for the wedding, which, as you can imagine, like busy, but lots of fun. And now we're back grinding away at Montrim for another State of TMF session. Super excited for everybody to join us here. Let us know if you're a first-time State of TMFer or if you've been here since the beginning. We're super excited about this session. We're going to be tackling a subject that's near and dear to Donatella's heart, which is really around storyboarding. But as a reminder for those that haven't, if this is your first State of TMF session, welcome to the community. We run these every other Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. This is your sort of like bi-weekly check-in with other TMFers. We tackle lots of different subjects. We've been talking a lot about inspections over the last couple shows, and we'll start to weave in some other topics soon. So let's get into the subject of today. So we talked a little bit already. We introduced the subject. So today's session, we're really going to be focusing on storyboarding. And I think more importantly, a lot of people consider storyboarding sort of a true inspection readiness or inspection preparation tactic or tool. But we want to also open some doors to what storyboarding can be useful for outside of inspections. Of course, they are a super useful inspection tool. We're going to cover a lot of really great things today. Donatella and I have already gone back and forth in sort of our pre-show chat, and there's lots of really great content. And we've even got some insights into our storyboard template that we use with our customers that you guys can take away today. So lots of super exciting things to tackle. All right, so let's jump into it. So I think that for me, as we go through this, Donatella, I think we'll jump back and forth, and I definitely want to kind of get your perspective on kind of where you've used storyboards. But I think a really good place to start is sort of just addressing the elephant in the room, which is that, clinical trials never really pan out exactly how we plan them. We could write the best possible plan and develop, the best possible team, but there are always going to be things that happen during that study that we just don't foresee at the beginning. It would be great if it was, seamless setup, conduct, closeout, with no real major issues. But of course, those things do come up, both internal or external, right, Donatella? Like there are always going to be some of those things. I think we talked about COVID, prior to this as being something that you just really couldn't plan for. What are some of the things that you see there?
No, exactly, Oliver. You're completely right. I think that in an ideal world, everyone would like to see, these phases of the clinical trial, set up, content, and close out. But the reality, and I think that everyone who's managing clinical trial agree, is that things happen, events happen, unpredictable things like COVID can happen. And so your clinical trial can change. The design of a clinical trial can change, have an impact by these events. So you can have a protocol amendment, maybe your principal investigator that left the site, a big change in the CRO, or a new country that you have to add in your clinical trial. So lots of things that you didn't plan for your clinical trial can happen. And so it can be really challenging to understand all the story of your clinical trial when there is no this linear, I would say, management and conduction of the clinical trial.
Right. And that obviously presents challenges in how you sort of keep everybody aligned and, of course, present that story, that consistent story. If all of these different things are happening, how do we make sure that that story is consistent across, when we're doing interviews with an inspector, when we're preparing for a specific inspection. So bottom line, clinical trials are complex. They're difficult. Things happen that we can never plan for, which presents challenges for us in being able to communicate and explain these events and issues that occur. And one of the main ways in which we recommend and many other teams use today to kind of counter that issue is, of course, storyboarding. So Donatello, from your perspective, maybe let's take a couple steps back. What is storyboarding to you, and maybe talk about sort of like how you first discovered storyboarding? When did that occur?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Oliver, because the very first time that I heard and then I faced TMF storyboarding, I was quite surprised because when, these guys told me, oh yes, let's do a TMF storyboarding, I was, seriously? So this person are going to draw my clinical trial, to make some pictures of my clinical trial? Because when I was at university, my roommate, she was attending the art academy, and storyboarding was an everyday activity. I mean, she was coming at home, making all this drawing, because basically, when you talk about storyboarding, it's something related to movie environment, entertainment, theater. Is something that you use to design the sequence of a particular scene, for example, of a movie. So it's a very visualized tool to understand the story of the movie. So it's very weird, let's say, to combine trial master file with a storyboarding. And the very first time I was very, let's say, surprised and I was shocked. But then when I discovered what a TMF storyboarding is and how it can help your story, I love it. I mean, I fall in love immediately because I think that it's really a powerful tool that not everyone know and not everyone use for the TMF management. But on the contrary, if you can develop and implement it, it can be really, powerful for your story. And just a quick, let's say, history. When I try to understand the origin of storyboarding, think that the very first storyboarding developing in the past was the one of the 3 Little Pigs by Walt Disney. So Walt Disney inventing the storyboarding, and now we are talking about storyboarding in Trial Master 5.
So in short, there, don't start drawing documents in a storyboard. That's
No,
kind of
please. I mean, if you're able, but honestly, no, please.
But really, it's the concept of being able to explain the sequence of events and how, and to align everybody to that, right? I think that's kind of the idea here with the storyboard, is to be able to give everybody an understanding of how things should be presented and aligning everybody onto that, right? Like we all know, and we say it over and over again, that TMF is kind of the story of the clinical trial. So conceptually, it makes sense to develop a storyboard. but maybe not like the examples that
No.
you mentioned, the kind of the cartoon character type storyboard, but really illustrating in a document or whatever format makes sense what that storyboard might look like. So maybe just kind of, if I can go back one step. So we talked about storyboarding and we talk about storyboards. Obviously, they're connected. What's the key difference for you, Donatella, there?
Yes. So when we talk about TMF storyboarding, is the process. We refer to the process of developing this document, the TMF storyboard, to be used as a reference, especially to explain a very particular event that occur in your clinical trial. If we refer to TMF storyboard, we are referring to the short reference document designed through the storyboarding in a way that we can use it for a more, let's say, efficient and factual-based communication, especially during the inspection. Because as you said, Oliver, I think that when it comes to inspection, what we want to achieve is a good communication with the inspector that we have. And sometimes, depending on your personal perspective, your personal role in the clinical trial and your responsibility, your point of view can be different. But what is important when it comes to inspection is to ensure that everyone is aligned, everyone is on the same page, everyone has the same vision of what happened. And storyboarding can really help to get this common vision and common underground, let's say, to be more prepared for inspection. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, and one of the things I really liked about kind of how you outlined that was really that, you know, you could certainly go off today after listening to what we talk about and maybe taking some of the steps that we're going to present and discuss today and go off and build a storyboard. But I think what you're emphasizing here is that, yes, it's important to create that documentation that helps align the team members, but it's also important to define the process for developing those storyboards, right?
Exactly.
Because that is also important, right? You might have a collection of storyboards within a specific inspections, you know, sort of a situation. Those storyboards need to follow, you know, perhaps the same format. They need to, you know, be consistent, right? And so that's where that process really comes in.
Exactly.
So now we talked a lot about, you know, the kind of using storyboards as a preparation technique or a tool prior to an inspection, but there obviously can be other useful applications for storyboarding. So, you know, some of the things that we've seen storyboarding be useful for are things like training, right? So if we're onboarding new team members that maybe are coming from a different group or a different organization, and we want to be able to explain some of the rationale behind, you know, what happened in a particular study or a specific event that occurred, and we want to be able to do that clearly and concisely, it can be a really useful tool for training. I think a big one, and this is something that Donatella, you and I talked about prior to today, was kind of that merger and acquisition. If you're part of an organization that's, you know, acquiring a molecule, or you've acquired an entire organization and there's an inheritance of TMFs that need to be understood, storyboarding can be a really useful exercise there. And of course, depending on the type of use case that you're going to leverage storyboarding for, you might approach the development of the storyboard slightly differently, right, Donatella?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Because the storyboarding is very flexible, I would say. Because it's a tool that you can use based on your need, is really the need that you have to define your storyboarding, your TMF storyboarding. So if you need to, you know, to reconstruct the story of an acquired TMF, for example, is different than get prepared for an inspection and maybe try to have all the team align on what happened in the last year before the inspection, rather than having a change in the study team and have an handover, you know, between maybe clinical project manager and try to explain everything that was managed and done for the clinical trial till the moment that the new employee entered into the study team. So it's really, let's say, a useful tool that can be adapted according to the situation, according to the specific need of your study team, because it's flexible and you can, change the scope and even the format whenever you need, based on the scenario that you are living in that moment. Even because there is no, I would say, regulatory requirement. I mean, if you have a look to the requirements, I think that you agree, Oliver. There are no storyboarding. Nothing requested by MHRA, FDA or other competent authority. It's really a company tool, a company-specific tool that if you develop it and implement it in a effective way, it can be very useful for your quality and for your inspection readiness.
And obviously I talked about merger and acquisition. We talked about inspection preparation. Like another example that comes to mind where a storyboard could be useful is like maybe you transition from one CRO to another. Why would a storyboard perhaps be useful in that context?
Absolutely. That is another, let's say, very common, unfortunately, very common scenario that we also supporting some of our customers with this, let's say, situation, because you start the clinical trial with a CRO, and then there can be some maybe GCP compliant issue or other issue during the clinical trial with the CRO, and so you have to, the best, let's say, decision after an assessment of the benefit and the risk is to change the CRO. But we know that to change the CRO while you are in the middle of the clinical trial can have a very big impact on all the processes, all the action, all the milestones. And so it's very important to, let's say, define the story in that particular moment of what happened, how you managed the situation, what you did to solve the situation, and try to prevent the situation to happen again in the future. Another example is also, as you said at the beginning, COVID. I think that, COVID is something unpredictable. And so sometimes to define the entire story of a clinical trial, what happened regarding the restriction, the limitation that we had during those years, and what happened to our clinical trial, it can be really helpful to understand how the clinical trial was managed during that particular event, during that particular moment, because we had some deviation from our current process, from our current SOP. And so it is important, it's very helpful to have a document that, let's say, summarize all the action taken by the study team.
So you mentioned something really interesting there. So you've mentioned document a couple of times. Now, I'm sure some folks on the line are probably going to be thinking, well, what's the best way for us to be able to design that storyboard? Is it a presentation? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it a document? Like, what have you seen, Donatella, and what are some of the recommendations there?
So in my experience till now, again, I've seen Word document, PowerPoint, but also Excel spreadsheet in terms of triannual certified storyboarding. Not yet drawings, Oliver, I have to say. So maybe someone some drawings, I don't know. I mean, it can be an option. Again, there is no requirement. So if you want to draw your TMF. But yes, at the moment, because there's no requirement and because it's really your specific tool, you can adapt this tool based on your need and especially based on the communication that you want to achieve. Because I think that the key message of storyboarding is to communicate a good story. And so communication with all the stakeholders, all the study team members is very important, it's very relevant. And so you have to define what is the best format to understand, to have everyone aligned on the same page. It is a Word format, let's do a document in Word. It is a PowerPoint with dashboard, I don't know, some graphs, let's do that one. It's an Excel spreadsheet that you can filter and do the stuff. Do that. I mean, in terms of format, you can really decide what's the best format for you. Obviously, as you said before, define it in a consistent way. So obviously define a process before implementing the storyboarding, because otherwise, you will have different storyboarding with no consistency, with no quality. So it's very important that first of all to define the process of TMF storyboarding and then your TMF storyboard format.
All right, perfect. We're going to try something slightly different here. We got a question from Jess, and I want to get Jess onto the line to ask her question directly. Jess, you had a question about expectations of filing storyboards. Do you want to just throw that question to us?
My question
was if there is an expectation that the storyboard needs to be filed in the TMF.
So, Jess, the answer is quite easy because it's no. I mean, the storyboarding is really your tool to get more inspection ready, to get more quality of the TMF, to get more compliance with your standards. So you're not going to show a TMF storyboarding to an inspector saying, hey, I did my storyboarding, so I did my exercise. Look at this. No, this is really a tool to get prepared. So it's not part of your QC, on documentation, on with oversight and health check on your TMF. Those are, let's say, evidence of your QC, of your oversight that have to be filed in the TMF because there is a specific zone in the TMF. This is more really a preparation tool, an internal tool that you have to share with the rest of the team, but let's say to get prepared for the interview with the inspector. So it's really to be aligned on the message to send and to send to the inspector during the inspection. But it's not a document that you usually show during inspection and that you usually file in the TMF.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for jumping on, Jess. All right, perfect. If you guys have any other questions that you want to throw to us, throw them into the Q&A and we'll promote you guys to the session if you guys want to ask it live. I think that's really interesting, right? Because it always goes back to this question of, what do you file and what do you not file, right? And I think you could probably make the case to file a storyboard if you wanted to, if you felt like it helped clarify it. We talk about, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but, a storyboard can be something that's quite useful in maybe the absence of a note to file, perhaps, right? And so it could be a useful tool to add clarity to a specific issue or event that you've identified. I think Daniel mentioned that if you have an SOP that says that you want to storyboard and storyboards are going to be a tool, you could also build the case that storyboards are something that you could be filed, but there's no regulatory expectation that you file those storyboards. I think that's the point that Donatella is making. It really is that preparatory tool to make sure that all of your team are aligned. Whenever I think about storyboarding, I always kind of think about it like an interrogation room. We want to make sure we get our story straight, right? And that's kind of the idea here. It makes sure that everybody understands what actually happened, what were some of the things that we did to be able to counter that issue, prevent it from happening again, and how we're going to monitor the success of those actions. This is how we want to present it to an inspector. You could surface that content to an inspector. You could also not, and just use it as a tool to serve interviews and make sure that those interviews are performed correctly. Perfect. Let's move on. Again, if you guys have questions, throw them to us. We'll see if we can add you to the show. How often should we be storyboarding, Donatella? What are some of the things that we recommend to customers here when we're working with them on storyboarding processes?
So to answer to your question, Oliver, I repeat what I said before, that TMF Storyboard is flexible. So because it's really a tool for based on your need, you can do the storyboard because there is a special event, because there is a particular growth in the company, and so you have to explain some changes in the organization, in the outsource model. You have to maybe explain some issue in the IP manufacturing. So there is a special event around the IP product, and you need to explain what occurred for this IP unit clinical trial. There is an acquisition, or there is a change in the study team. Maybe the study team allocated to the clinical trial has been changed. So there is a particular event that can be maybe for you that are part of the study team and are leaving the clinical trial, can be easy to understand, even based on the other documents of the TMF, but for someone external can be challenging. And so to help to reconstruct the story, even, for the rest of the stakeholder or other people that will participate to an inspection, storyboarding can help. And so before an inspection, again, we know that we have to be 100% every day, every time, every second inspection ready. But when there is an inspection, we know that there is also this preparation period. So if you know that at the end of the year there will be an inspection and you have never do a storyboard, this can be the right time. I mean, it can be really the moment that you take the story of the TMF and you try to understand if it is a complete story, if it is a good story, if all the pieces of the puzzle are there, and you can easily, make the links between all the documents, all the action, and all the decision. Because we know, and we have discussed, I think, in several virtual events, that think about all the decisions that are made in emails. And sometimes to reconstruct action and decision that are, tracked in an email can be very challenging. So a storyboard can help to link, the official document, maybe a meeting minute, with a decision communicated and shared in an email and not in an official letter or in another official document. And because I like TMF storyboarding, I would suggest also something like yearly basis. Why not? I mean, it's not a requirement, it's true. But if you see that it's a very helpful tool that can help you to understand the story, that can help you to ensure more compliance, more quality in your clinical trial, why not to do this document, this exercise on a yearly basis? Because we know that things will happen, things will change in clinical trial, and so retrieve and do something in the past can be challenging. If you do that on a regular basis, why not? It's not a long and detailed document. It's a short document, but very efficient in terms of message to be shared. So why don't implement this exercise in your TMF management process and do that on a yearly basis to tell, okay, this year, this is what happened in my clinical trial, and keep aligned everyone in the sub team and in the TMF stakeholders. Don't you agree, Oliver? I mean, I know that I'm a TMF fan and all that stuff, but I think that annually it's not a big effort and can be very helpful at the end of the day.
Exactly. I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in it's serving as a training tool, as a continuous improvement tool. I think Adrienne in the chat also mentioned that this is an internal quality document. They consider it an internal quality document. And I think that's important too. Like, this can be part of your continuous improvement quality plans, where you're storyboarding not just to prepare for a specific inspection, but as a rule of thumb, so that everybody can learn a little bit more about some of the things that happen, so that we're able to design better processes moving forward. It's just a really, really useful exercise as an internal kind of best practice. So absolutely. I see a bunch of people here talking about templates and formats for storyboarding. So, like I mentioned before, and like Donatella mentioned, like the format is really dependent on you. Like, I think you got to think about the use case, and also think about the team, right? Like, ultimately these storyboards are serving a purpose for your team to be aligned. And so if you feel like your team is gonna be able to get there faster with something that's visual, something that's easy to understand, maybe PowerPoint presentation is something that's kind of the right option for you. Or if everybody works in a very document heavy environment and that's, something that you feel would add value, then you can do it in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. And I feel like, again, like Donatella mentioned, it really is dependent on the focus of the storyboard. If it's to describe, a change of CRO, maybe that isn't a very, very large storyboard that you need to create. And so a PowerPoint presentation may make sense. But if you're talking about a series of really, special events that happen, you need more detail, then maybe a document or an Excel spreadsheet is the right way to go. All right. Perfect. So let's move forward. We've already talked a lot about benefits, but I thought it would be a really good idea to kind of talk about some of the other areas that you can gain from storyboarding. Of course, we talked about the completeness of the story. That's what storyboarding ultimately allows us to do. Inspection preparation, we already talked about. I mentioned ahead of time a little snippet on how to avoid, how you can use storyboarding, in fact, to kind of avoid notes to file or stitch together the topics that you might include in a note to file. I think it also shows and demonstrates that you've adhered to your plans and procedures. Like, part of your storyboard will ultimately outline how you were able to identify a specific issue or how you tackled a specific event, and then the process is there on out. That's something, of course, that you should be doing in accordance with your plans and SOPs, and it's a good way to align to that. Study team alignment, handover from project to project. Maybe that's something that's quite useful if we have any CRO folks on the line here. Storyboarding as part of your handover back to the sponsor can be a really useful exercise and a bit of added value for them as well. So there's a lot of things there. Donatella, what are some of the other benefits that you see from storyboarding outside of the ones that we already mentioned?
Yeah, first of all, oversight, Oliver, because oversight is one of the requirements that we have in terms of TMF management. A storyboard telling us to tell a better story, a complete story, can definitely support us in the oversight exercise. It's also a tool to ensure more consistency and compliance, because we know that inspectors are looking for consistency, are looking for some standard in terms of quality. So storyboard can really help to get everyone on the same page, as we already said, and everyone send same message to the inspector. Because think about the scenario of an inspection. I don't think that anyone wants to have, me saying a story, you, Oliver, saying another version of the story, because the inspector will get confused, and so the inspection will not end in a very good way. So consistency and compliance, easy navigation and document retrieval, because we know that TMF cannot be the only repository for our documentation of the clinical trial. So it's very important to know where to go and look for a specific document that will be the evidence of our story. It supports collaboration and communication, study team, all the collaboration with the third-party vendor, the CRO, and all the people that work in a clinical trial. It's very important to have everyone aligned. So this can be a tool to get this alignment. Adaptability, because no matter if your clinical trial is small, is one country, 10 country, one country, whenever you have a clinical trial, this tool can be flexible. You can adapt this tool to your need, to your specific need, to your study design, and so it can be really flexible for you. And the one that I prefer more is holistic approach. It means that we know that the TMF is composed by single document that we know they must be good document, high quality documentation, but all these documents are linked between each other to tell the story. So it's very important to be able to cross-check and demonstrate these links during inspection. And sometimes it can be challenging due to the nature of the document, due to the nature of the event. So storyboarding can really help to have this holistic approach to your trial master file. Do you agree, Oliver?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like you said before. Storyboards can be the glue that kind of pieces those different chapters together, and it ensures that those that are communicating that story and are ultimately the singing from the same hymn sheet. And we'll talk a little bit about how we tend to structure storyboards a little bit later on, and maybe provide some examples, because that, I think, is going to add a little bit more context to kind of some of the recommendations that we've made so far. So again, if you guys have questions, keep them coming. We'll try and answer them as we come. If you guys want to ask live on the show, you can just let us know when you ask your question and we'll bring you on. Now, I think it's important for us to start talking about the process of developing the storyboard, right? And so we mentioned earlier on, there's two things. There's the storyboarding process, and then there's the storyboard itself. So let's start with the process. So typically what we will look to do is we'll try and get all of the details and the essential elements of ultimately what we're looking to storyboard. So we'll try and map that specific story. We'll try and make a decision as early as possible on the format, but there's been a number of occasions where we've decided it's going to be a Word document and then it's become a PowerPoint presentation and vice versa. That's totally fine as well. As you start to build out the content of the storyboard, you'll get a feel for the best way for you to present it. And then, Donatella and I, one of the things that we talk about all the time is really making sure that everything that you do has purpose, right? And so this storyboard needs to have a goal. What are you trying to achieve with the storyboard? Is it to align internal team members? Is it to make sure that you understand the story before you get to an inspection, or are there other reasons? These are the things that need to be outlined, because that will be your point of reference as you go through and develop that specific storyboard, and then kind of building out and drafting the desired outcome. What do we ultimately want to see at the end? We're then going to start looking at trying to connect with the various different stakeholders. So we're going to try and identify as much information as possible about the subject of the storyboard from those that were involved, and then start to add or take out details that we feel aren't relevant. Now, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make with storyboards is they make them too detailed, right? And they put too much information into the document. It's so important that storyboards need to be high level. The TMF is where the detail is. The storyboard is ultimately what helps you, pull those things together. So at that point, you might get a lot of information from study stakeholders, TMF teams, clinical teams, or whoever it might be. It's your decision at that point to be able to say, okay, well, this is not relevant. This is too detailed. I'm going to reference something else and kind of keep it as high level as possible. You're going to want to also look at how, certain existing documentation are connected to the storyboard. So what plans, SOPs, notes to file, existing documentation, anything that's going to support the story, that's something that you're going to want to be able to understand and verify, one, they exist, and two, that they can be referenced in the storyboard itself. You're going to verify the evidence and then finalize the storyboarding with the various different SMEs that have been involved in that process. So that's typically how we'll walk through a storyboarding exercise. It's not the only way to do it, right, Donatella? But this is the way that we find works best for us. Any top tips here that maybe I missed that you'd want to highlight?
No, absolutely. I think that this is the approach that we usually take and that we usually suggest when it comes to TMF storyboarding. And I think that one aspect that is worth to underline is what you said, that don't make the TMF storyboard a very long and detailed document, because otherwise it will lose its efficacy, its purpose. Because think about the situation that you are in the room before getting the interview with the inspector, and maybe you need to write a little bit of your information. If you have 1,100 pages of document, how can you read them just before the interview? I mean, it's really something that you quickly have a look. You know that what the story is. You know where are the other references if you need, the details. If you need to show some document. So it's really an high-level document with no details or long description that can be found in the documentation filed in the TMF.
Exactly. I think there's a really good point there also, because we want to keep it high level, who you involve in that process is going to be important too. There may be certain individuals or certain functions within your organization that just are more detailed, right? And so that's going to impact perhaps how high level you can stay. And so really try and think about who's working on this storyboard and who's going to be the best person to be able to keep that high level. Because like Donatella said, if we get into a situation where the storyboard is too long and detailed, it's supposed to be kind of like a quick reference card prior to a conversation, prior to a question. If it's too long, no one's going to be able to remember it, right? And so that's something that I think is really, really important is, it has to be focused and important and consumes all of the information that needs to be consumed, but it needs to be as high level as possible. So now let's talk about a little bit of a case study, because I think, this is something that we do quite often with customers where we go through some storyboarding, but there was kind of an interesting example of a customer that we worked with in the past that was, not as familiar with storyboarding. So there was obviously some preparatory work to be done there. And we wanted to identify a specific scenario that we could use to be able to build that storyboard on. And we settled on a change in CRO. Donatella, do you want to maybe kind of walk us through, how that worked with that specific customer and some of the things that we did? And then I'll kind of jump into the storyboard itself.
Yes, sure. So this, as already said at the beginning, storyboard can have different scenarios. In this case, in this particular case, the sponsor was facing the change of a CRO in the middle of the clinical trial. So it's a very big, let's say, event that have a big impact on the clinical trial. And so to be able to complete the story, to be able to reconstruct better the story of this clinical trial, we suggested to track this event and to track all the action through a TMF storyboarding. The sponsor was, for him, it was the first time that he heard about TMF storyboarding. So we suggested to start with a training on storyboarding, because doesn't make sense that I develop will do a TMF storyboarding if you don't know what TMF storyboarding is. So let's say to get more knowledge and understanding of what TMF storyboarding is the first step. And then we did, as a second step, a workshop to develop the TMF storyboard. So based on the theory, let's say, that we share and that we train, we teach them how to define and design their specific TMF storyboard based on that specific situation. So the change of a CRO during a clinical trial. So it was really an exercise done together based on what we taught them, we trained them, and based on our best practices, suggestion, and recommendation. But let's say the most helpful aspect was that the TMF storyboard was developed by the customer, by the sponsor. So it was something that they really understood, because they developed the storyboard guided by us, guided by our expertise, by our knowledge, with our indication. But at least they were able to, let's say, understand the final deliverable, and then after that, they implemented the TMF storyboarding in their current process for TMF management.
So let's talk about that final deliverable, because I think everyone's been waiting the entire time to get their eyes on an example storyboard that we put together. Now, I want to just kind of lay out a full kind of, I guess, a disclaimer here is that, like, no two storyboards need to be the same. And so really that storyboard needs to be customized to what you think is most meaningful. This example that we're going to share with you today could be delivered in a PowerPoint presentation, could be delivered in a Word document, but they typically focus on a few key items that I'm going to go through. So if we think about the storyboard, it's important to kind of outline some key information so that when someone picks that up, physically or digitally, they know exactly the study and the product and the storyboard focus, right? So you really want to outline, this specific storyboard is to tackle the change of CRO from this date to this date. That will be the title of the storyboard. And then I think the best place for us to start is really identifying and stating that what the specific issue was. And again, we want to try and keep this as high level as possible. Here we've identified a small paragraph. So we want to outline the issue that was identified by the internal teams, including, I guess, any information about how the teams conducted themselves once that issue was identified. Try and use dates as much as possible, and ensure that the statement that you put here is written in a positive manner. This was something that Donatella and I repeated over and over and over again. It's incredibly important that you keep things positive when you're developing these storyboards, because ultimately this is the reference point for your internal teams. If we talk negatively about an issue or how an issue was identified or resolved, that will creep into how it's presented in an inspection environment. So that's just something that's really, really, really important. Then we've got important background information. So it's important here that you start to identify the high level information that you have available that relays, the specific event that you're describing or something that contributed to the issue, with a key focus as much as possible on the root cause. What was identified at that point in time and what was the root cause. We should try as much as possible to limit this to 3 to 5 points or bullet points or in paragraph format, but it needs to be as high level as possible. Donatella, any thoughts here? Maybe, we obviously got some example content here. Do you maybe want to walk through some of the content here to help give some of that context?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I think that the very starting point in a storyboard template is to identify the issue. So I'm writing this, storyboard because in this case, there was a change in the CRO. And obviously, the very first question is why you decided to change a CRO in the middle of a clinical trial. And so in this case, it was a GCP non-compliance due to a non-verification of the data source and data documentation that was a responsibility of the CRO. So you identify the issue, let's say, that caused that action that can be challenging, to explain during inspection. And then some background information. What I mean is that obviously there can be some assumption, some other references that can be helpful to understand how, for example, you identified that issue, how you identified that issue in that moment and not 3 months ago or 1 month later. So some information that more clarify, how you get those issues identified and why you decided to develop the storyboard and all those actions. So as Oliver said, it can be a paragraph. In this case, it was, let's say, more a script, but it can be also some bullet points that you can very summarize high level the sequence of the action that you took. So it depends on the way of the communication that you prefer. But very important, as underlined by Oliver, is the proactive and positive approach to this identification of issue and mitigation of issue. The aim of the storyboard is, yes, I have identified an issue, but I did something to solve that issue. So show that you were very active and proactive. Try to demonstrate what you did to correct that issue, and try also to demonstrate what you did to prevent that issue to occur again in the future. So this is really the positive message and the positive communication that from the storyboard will have to come out and to go during the inspection. Because if you go to an inspector, he doesn't want to hear, oh yes, we had these serious breaches with the CRO, with this GCP compliance with the CRO. Okay, but what did you do to solve this issue? Issue can happen. No clinical trial is perfect. So it's very important, to prepare a very positive and proactive answer to the inspector.
Exactly. So let's talk about that for a second. So the next couple of things that we would like to see, or we typically like to put into a storyboard, is the impact analysis. Again, I've emphasized here high level. So you really want to make sure that there's a statement, a very high level statement regarding the impact that the issue had or could have had or will have on data integrity and or, patient safety. So you want to be able to outline here in a few lines, a couple bullet points, whatever it might be, on what the impact of that specific issue might have been. Here we have, of course, another example. Of course, you can access these slides afterwards to kind of see the words and the way that we've written it. And then something that Donatella mentioned, right? Like, it's really, really important that you don't just present the issue without talking about what was done afterwards. And so you want to look at the corrective and preventive action and summarize that in sort of an overview. So listing out the high-level actions that you've taken in the past, or that were taken recently, or that you plan to take, to be able to clarify and address how you're going to prevent that issue from happening or occurring again, with a real kind of tie back to the root cause, right? To make it really, really clear that you have a really deep understanding of what the root cause is, and this is the action or the set of actions that you're going to be taking to prevent this from happening again. If you can, try and include a date, a quarter, a month, something that ties to a timeline. Obviously, this is a story that we're trying to reconstruct, so it's super, super important that you try and be accurate with the dates. These dates are, of course, the dates that your team is going to use should they, be interviewed or present this content. And so making sure that they're accurate is really, really important. And then, of course, if you do have any actions that are still in progress, review and try and update those prior to the inspection. Maybe you start this storyboard a couple months before the inspection happens. It isn't something that you complete and then only open up the day of the inspection. Really review it, update it, make sure that it's as accurate as it could be. And then the final kind of, section of the storyboard for this example was really outlining what follow-up actions were taken. So, what are some of the adjustments to our process long-term, a summary of the things that have been done, and then, of course, any supporting documentation itself. So what SOPs, work instructions, specific documentation that lives within the TMF that's referenceable. Again, like Donatella mentioned earlier, this is something that's really, really important. You want to make sure that the team that's ultimately discussing this topic have an idea of what content in the TMF this relates to, so that should questions arise around that, well, we've got a connected storyboard to it. And then, of course, some information around, who the SME is, what section perhaps that this specific issue or event was documented in. So that kind of outlines the storyboard here. And like I mentioned at the beginning, right, disclaimer, this is not how you should all develop storyboards. This is an example of some of the sections that you might want to cover. We would certainly recommend evaluating each of these key sections every time you develop a storyboard, and whether it's relevant or not. My guess is that most of the times, most of these sections will be relevant, but there may be other sections, depending on the specific focus of the storyboard, there might be other sections that you want to add that's going to help, build that storyboard a little bit more concisely. So with that kind of brings us to kind of the end of the storyboard template, and also the end of the storyboard session. So, again, as a reminder, we want to map the story, think about the format, start thinking about the goal and the desired outcome for the storyboard, start collaborating with internal stakeholders, gathering as much information as possible, then start refining that information, adding, removing content that we feel is too detailed. We're going to verify all of the kind of internal references, plans, SOPs, verify the story with the larger team, and then finalize the storyboard prior to, having that discussion or presentation with the inspector. If you guys have other questions, we can jump into them now. If there aren't any other questions, we can close it for today. Donatella, any final thoughts that you want to share with our community today?
No, I think that we gave the audience lots of take-home message. I think that the main one is really develop and do this exercise of TMF storyboarding, because it can be really helpful for your team, for your internal communication, or for the communication with all the vendors that you have in your clinical trial. Be positive and proactive. So issue can happen. Clinical trial and human beings are not perfect, but you can fix issue, and you can show that you try to do your best to be in compliance with requirement and GCP in your clinical trial. And remember, the storyboard is flexible. So who knows, maybe someone in the audience in the future will draw the trial master files.
Maybe. We'll see. And if you guys have suggestions on how maybe you would develop a storyboard template differently, I think there were some questions internally in the chat where people were asking to share their own templates. But really great way to do that is to head over to the community. So if you do want to try and see what other people are doing, go and ask that in the community itself. Head to LinkedIn, the State of TMF community. There's over 1,000 TMF professionals in there waiting to get those questions from you. So throw those questions in there, and maybe others can share some insights into how they're managing this process. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. We have 2 more sessions before we take a brief break for State of TMF. It goes without saying, but I want to thank everybody for the continued support of the live event and the podcast. If you guys had to drop off, or if you want to share this with other team members, you can access the State of TMF. A week after the live event will be available on YouTube, on Spotify, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can listen to that on your commute while you're at work or whatever it might be, or on the beach, Donatella, right? On vacation. Thanks so much for joining me, Donatella. It's great to have you back and joining us for another session. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for another big topic coming soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the State of TMF, a live event and podcast brought to you by Montreum, the leaders in clinical, quality, and regulatory solutions for scaling life science organizations. If you liked today's episode, hit the subscribe button, view the full episode with video on YouTube, and follow us on LinkedIn for more great content coming from Montreum soon. See you next time.